I'm going to solve for the male loneliness epidemic and the patriarchy in one fell blow. Men are the naturally submissive gender. Oh, wow. That's quite a statement. Okay, let's get into this. I was kind of talking about this before on the stream, but essentially when patriarchy is particularly masculine, there's dominance and submission all the way down in every single institution, in political institutions, in religious institutions, all the way down. There is dominance over others and submission to someone else. All of submission is giving in nature. You give up your power, you give up control. And even like the concept of like just the logistics of submitting like a document, or submitting when a man submits a proposal on one knee to propose to his wife to be, that is also submission, right? Now, for clarity, I am using kind of gender binary terms right now, but we know by and large that gender is a spectrum. There are masculine and feminine qualities within all of us, and we can choose our gender. I'm loving all of the LGBTQIA plus support and movements and all of the things, but for the sake of this argument, I know that's such a cop-out, but for the sake of this argument, under the realm of traditional gender roles and patriarchy that we are trying to be more educated about so that we can then dismantle it, I'm going to be using like men and women and masculinity and femininity, so just note that. But the reason that we have such a warped sexual health in this country, in this Western society, is because hierarchy and patriarchy, so dominance and submission, has been transposed over onto the dynamics in the bedroom, when in reality, this has turned into men who are going out into society, and they are pressured with the weight of the world on their shoulders, being told by patriarchal systems that they need to be the sole providers, and so they need to make more money. And if they're not making enough money to be a single income household, there is something wrong with them, and they are devalued in that sense, and they are feeling the pressures of not being able to even express their frustration at this system that is not serving them and is letting them down, the system that was supposed to prop them up in the first place. Men are being consistently told all of these very harmful ideologies, and they are internalizing them. They have the weight of the world on their shoulders. They're going into these 9-to-5s or these blue collar jobs, and they have to submit to their boss, and they have to give up their labor, and they have to work harder and longer than the previous generation did. And the system of late stage capitalism is putting all of these pressures on these men who are consistently being driven down and down and down, and villainized and villainized and villainized. And so then they come home and they have wifey, and wifey is there, and she probably just had a long day at work too, because again, single income households are just not as feasible anymore. So there she is. And what does husband want? Well, he's been told this lie that dominance and submission are the only kinds of interpersonal dynamics that exist, and therefore, because out in the world he has to submit. The only way for him to balance said submission is by dominating wifey. Again, this is heteronormative. I'm just trying to paint a picture here. That is why we have this like obsession with dominance and submission in the world of sexuality. Now, hold on. Everyone calm down. Calm down. I am not kink shaming. I am a kinky freak, just like the next deconstructed Bible belter, okay? Like, I have a lot of sexual repression to work out. This is not about adding any shame to the already shameful existence of living in capitalism, right? But whenever these dynamics have been transposed onto the bedroom dynamics, and there's hierarchy involved in our sexual partnership between men and women, there is nothing wrong, I want to say, with like the kink community trying to explore those like power dynamics and the give and take and control. And I understand that there's so much about like kink culture that can be very freeing, and people are able to work through the pressures of living in a capitalist, hierarchical, patriarchal society. That's exactly what happens when we say like, oh, I have like a kink in my shoulder here, like because I'm stressed and I've been working too hard. And what do? We go get a massage so someone can work out that kink to move forward with their lives, so they're not just like stuck in that stressful state. So in that sense, like the world of kink and like the dom sub dynamics that people kind of fall into, they can be a really important part of breaking away from patriarchy. But I think it is so important and so lost that the recognition that dom sub dynamics in the bedroom are the direct result of patriarchy and the vertical dominance and submission dynamic being played out in every fucking facet of our lives, to the point where, yes, it gets all the way into the bedroom. So when I say that men are the naturally submissive gender, all right, I do not in that statement say that womanhood is a naturally dominant gender. All right. And that is where I think the crux of this issue is, the paradox that is kind of hard to wrap our heads around is, now, to me, I might get a lot of people like, that sounds like cognitive dissonance. You can't believe both of those same things, that men are the naturally submissive gender, but women aren't the naturally dominant gender. Like, that's cognitive dissonance. The difference between cognitive dissonance and paradox to me is that cognitive dissonance leads to more harm. All right. So that's a really simplified way of putting it. But paradox can be a beautiful thing. Everything that breaks down in nature ends up as a paradox. The wave is the entire path of the particle is a paradox. Okay. Both things are true at the same time, and it can be beautiful. So when I say that women are not the naturally dominant gender, it's because we don't fucking care about dominance or submission, because womanhood is energetically horizontal. We don't need hierarchy at all. We don't need to play the game to find fulfillment. And in fact, we are conditioned to not matter in the world of hierarchy and patriarchy. And this is kind of a frustrating conflict that feminism is kind of butting heads with in patriarchy, because feminism is over here trying to say, hey, hierarchy is not working as the dominant way of looking at economics and social issues and all of these problems that we're facing. Like, we need to have a more horizontal objective. And that is even what class consciousness is. And again, going back to saying that men are the naturally submissive gender, there is a reason that armies work. There's a reason that the military works, and that capitalism works, and that religion works, or have worked for so long. And it is because they have mostly been run by men, participated in by men, and men thrive, are conditioned to thrive in hierarchy. Way back when the agricultural revolution first started forming and men became stationary people, and we stopped being nomadic hunter-gatherers and moving around. When the agricultural revolution brought about being sedentary in one spot throughout the entire year and being more intentional about working the land to bring about food, and then having what? The first instance of a surplus gain in human history. So you hear economic experts all the time talking about surplus, and capitalists love the idea of, well, what would we do with all of the surplus if we had socialism? I can't. The first time we had surplus as a society was when we became farmers, and we had this idea like, hey, what if we, in this field, we planted all of this wheat, and we, because there's only one season. Well, I don't actually know about farming. I think there's only one season for wheat. I don't know. But there's only one season for whatever specific crop you want to enter here. And what we can do is we can plant a lot of it and then save some of it to have throughout the rest of the year. Well, then whenever the agricultural revolution started to create a surplus of goods, we needed a priest class or an administrative class to hold on to the surplus and then start distributing the surplus amongst the community when, maybe your neighbor was struggling. And also it was a way to keep people banded together, like neighboring farms and banded together in a singular village, instead of always being at war with your neighbor. All right. That was the original intention of having a state. At the time, it wasn't a state, but it was like the priest class, right? The temple leaders of whatever, that's the thing, of whatever cultural religion was in play at the time. They all had a male-led priest class. Well, they weren't all male-led. I'm saying male. A men's-led priest class in the beginning, not all of them, but most of them. And the distribution of these surplus goods was their responsibility. Fast forward thousands of years later, that's why we are the way we fucking are. But there's a chance that way back when the agricultural revolution first took off and the hierarchy of the priest class being the decision makers of everyone in the community and how the surplus of goods was going to be distributed, what if there had been more women? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that the dice roll, like the cards fell where they needed to naturally fall. Like, in that sense, patriarchy did its job and it organized a society on a global scale that is at its end, the end of its life stage, I think, naturally. But in that sense, but thinking back to those early days of the agricultural revolution, what if it had been women who were chosen to be the priest class? Like, can you imagine how different everything would look? And guess what? I would probably be here now saying, hey, what I'm saying is, even if the women had become the priest class, like, there would have been issues with any system that we create, because again, we need to be able to rebel against something in order to bring about human evolution and progress. So that's a hell of a side tangent. But all of that goes back to men are the naturally submissive gender, and men are also the naturally dominant gender. Women are not the naturally submissive gender, though. That is what I want to get across. Men can have all of the dominance they fucking want amongst each other. Do I think it's harmful? Do I think hierarchy amongst men and in like the patriarchal corporate and religious institutions of control, do I think it's causing more violence and leading to capitalism and exploitation and all of the things, because in a vertical chain of command, someone's on the bottom getting fucked and not in a way they probably like? Yeah, I think it's harmful for men. However, the first thing we need to do is absolutely not have any room for the assumption, the false assumption, the insanity of this idea that women are the naturally submissive gender. And I know I took a lot of twists and turns there, but I appreciate you listening. I think it is so important to start. I personally think, I think it is so important to start the conversation there, because here's the thing. I'm going to keep ranting a little bit longer as I literally knock my light over because I'm so impassioned. I'm seeing all of the chatters' chats. I will read through them for just a second, but I have one more point that I want to bring home here. I started making content to push back against the institution of Christianity that is preying on its congregation members to keep them in fear, living in fear, so that they can influence them to vote for the religious leaders' friends who are political leaders, who are butt buddies. The religious leaders and political leaders in this country are actively trying to build a theocracy. And so we have these church members who are looking to their religious leaders for guidance, for a sense of fulfillment, for a sense of purpose. And these religious leaders are warping the conversation to promote far-right ideologies and authoritarian acceptance so that they can stay in power alongside their political leader friends. So that is why I originally started making content, and why my content has kind of shifted from just being about religion to also including politics, right? Because in order for me to say, hey, there's a way to live outside of Christianity and organized religion in a way that is healthy and still an active participant in a progressive society, and you can feel so much freer when you release all of the belief systems of being afraid of eternal damnation and purity culture and the subjugation of women, I'm actively fighting all of these things, right? Well, I think that that's only half of the battle. The other battle is like, okay, so how am I actually proving my point? Well, I'm doing so by trying to learn more about what a progressive society would look like. That's where the practical application of political ideology comes into play, which I still have so much more to learn about, but suffice it to say, y'all can call me Commie Mommy because I am like so far to the left now. I don't think I can ever go back. But my point is, I originally started making content because I think that also like in the political sphere, there's like, I'm seeing that there is room for more conversation about how religion is being used to amplify authoritarian fascism and how to keep people disempowered, and also pitted against non-believers, right? So one thing I always say about religion, and this is going to tie it all back into my original statement that men are the naturally submissive gender. I say this all the time. You cannot talk about religion without talking about sex. Because at the very nature of how systems of control, of how authoritarian regimes, even fascist regimes, the core of their intention is to keep our self-expression as limited as possible so that we are conformist, complacent, and controlled. How do we do that? By villainizing and controlling certain kinds of sexuality. So here we are. You can't talk about religion without talking about sex. The reason that so many, particularly women, but all kinds of people, are leaving organized patriarchal religion, one of the biggest drivers is the lack of personal autonomy over a woman's own body, right? Now, this is also true for men in the church as well, particularly the horrific evil of conversion camps and trying to, again, repress young men's natural expression of their sexuality, which is towards someone who is gendered the same as them in many ways, shapes, and forms. This also brings about transphobia, right? Because it is an attempt, and my heart goes out to trans people because the reason they become this like the top of the pyramid of identity politics is because to be trans is to challenge the very notion of sexual control in its most intense form. And it has become the main crux of, like, I can't even believe Democrats did not do enough for trans people in the sense that they were being, what do you call it? Virtue signaling and standing up for trans people in a lot of ways. But in what way, shape, or form has the Democratic Party been actually advocating for the systemic and institutionalized safety of trans people instead of just virtue signaling? That is his own thing. So you can't talk about religion without talking about sex. And when I talk about how men are the naturally submissive gender, whenever I bring up the fact that sexual health, sexual wellness, and the sexual expression of every person, which, by the way, as adults, once we become our most self-actualized self, our sexual expression is the actual epitome of all self-expression. It is who we are at our core. It's literally where we find our most pleasure. So how we can just shove aside the context of sexuality and all of these hierarchical, patriarchal, capitalist structures is beyond me. And so you can't talk about religion without talking about sex, and men are the naturally submissive gender. I will stand by these absolutely moving forward. I will stand up for trans people without trying to use them as virtue signaling. I will stand up for the LGBTQIA+ community because the more ownership we have over our own sexual expression, the more everyone benefits, because when we can become the best versions of ourselves, we are able to become the best versions of a society that is more interconnected and digitally connected than ever. And so that is what I stand for on this channel, in my content, and in my life. Mommy is done ranting.